Hi everyone, it's Philip here. How you getting on? I don't know if you can see, I've got a bit of growth here, bit of hair growth even. Decided not to shave this morning, and that's a bit of a risky decision. If anyone knows the history with me and beards, I did grow one fairly decent bushy lumberjack style beard some years ago, and caused some, shall we say, interesting conversations at home. So I want to get into that a little bit. The purpose of the keeping the beard actually. So I'm going to talk about one thing that occurred to me as I stood there with razor in hand, thinking, "Am I going to commit to cutting again?" Is there's a principle at work here, and that principle is good things take time, and with the swift few strokes of a razor blade, a few days of patient labour will be destroyed. So. And I kind of wanted to talk about patience a little bit today, and reflecting on Revelation chapter 10, because in a 22 chapter book, we're only now really getting to the substance or the content of the scroll of judgment that was sealed, was in God's hand, and which we've all been building up toward wanting to read, and we kind of are only now getting there. And the interesting element within Revelation, of course, is not only is this book. There's a friend at the door. My goodness, breaking curfew. This is dangerous. I won't tell you who it is. What it will mean probably is the dog will go nuts. So just prepare for that. So yeah, we got chapter 10. We finally get into this scroll that we've been waiting for, and that really a lot of the energy of the book has been directed toward the revealing of this revelation, right? Of this scroll, and yet, well, I won't say and yet, the building of that tension has been principally due to all of these interruptions to getting there. First of all, you've got these 7 seals, of course. You can't get the scroll until you get past the seals, so that's the first problem. And then once the seals are broken, the second problem is we want to announce that we've got a scroll to even read. So these trumpets. So that's part of the tension built into it. The other part, of course, is the martyr's own cry, which is in the seals, the unbreaking of the seals. I think it's seal 5, and we hear them crying out, "Well, how long must we wait for our justice?" The martyrs who have died in faithful service to God and are waiting for the scales of justice to be rebalanced in their favour. And the word to them is, well, just a little longer, you need to hold on. So they are told to be patient, and they are given some things to soothe them in the meantime, some robes and so on. But really just to signify, I think, that God has not forgotten them. Of course, they're in the throne room in the first place, so they are not forgotten. They're very present in God's mind and in God's plans. And while they wait for justice, they don't have to wait empty-handed. So there's an element of soothing, but nevertheless, it's still a call to patience. And the whole book kind of implies that and pushes us toward that very thing. And it's interesting, when we think of patience, or when I think of patience, I am not a patient man, by the way. It's one of those things I've had to work on all my life, and maybe one day I might consider myself patient, but I'll have to wait until that day. That patience is something that we think of as a necessary condition to get the thing that we really, really want. I will wait for something, provided I can expect to get it. I'll be patient for that. But patience being a virtue in and of itself suggests really that, yes, while patience is a virtue that allows us to endure in good spirits for the thing that we want, we actually are confronted with the notion that patience itself, being a patient person, is the greater goal, with the greater gift, really. That so this is the second thing I want to kind of reflect on a little bit right here is so often the thing that we're waiting for, that we've built our hopes and expectations on, it turns out not to be quite what we hoped for, and it's very often the case that when we receive what we longed for, we discover it's not. It cannot bear the weight of our hopes and expectations. So, and all these elements kind of exist in chapter 10 in the coming of the scroll. So we've got a scene where a mighty angel, and we're given the impression that this angel is, if there are hierarchies in heaven, then this angel is right up there. And we're given those clues by that. He's robed in a cloud, and there's allusions in fact, it says quite outright in Daniel that the Son of Man will come riding a cloud. So there's some connections there with divinity. Then it's never said, and it's never even implied that the angel is the Son of God. It's an angel, but the way that it's depicted, and that there's a rainbow effect, and in fact that just as God is praised as being creator of the heavens and the earth and all that's on the earth and all that's in the sea, this angel comes from heaven and then has a foot on earth and a foot on the sea, therefore representing God as the creator God, ruling over all of these dominions. And so this mighty angel represents that. And it's this angel which brings the scroll to John. And as one of the commentators, in fact several commentators point out, the narrative flow is preserved in this. And what I mean by that really is it says that John receives from God an inspiration which comes from Jesus through an angel to John. So there's a God, Jesus, angel, John kind of flow of, again, if we want to go back to hierarchy, that's the flow of the information, and so it's preserved again here. God has the scroll, which is then handed to Jesus, who breaks the seals, and the trumpets are called, and then the unsealed scroll is given to the angel, who then gives it to John. So we're at this point now. We've been waiting patiently or impatiently, as the case may be, for this great news, this great judgment of God, and again, as I've mentioned, that John it's a genuine vision. I don't ever want to imply that it's not. At the same time, it's a vision that when John comes to write it or put it onto paper, to convey what he experienced, if we're talking in a way of having to bring into our three-dimensional world many, many more dimensions, and you'll notice that John, he's everywhere and nowhere in the story. He's present to everything. He's in heaven and he's on earth. He's able to see the things that happen beneath the earth, even as he's seeing the things that happen in heaven. He's got this perspective which is beyond dimensional. And so when he tries to bring this uber-dimensional vision and insight and revelation to earth and write it down, he draws on what you'd expect him to draw on: his heritage, his what other visions and the way that others have described or tried to convey meaning in this very sort of it's one of the only things we've really got to communicate, which is words and language. There are other ways to communicate, of course, but words are unique. So he draws on his heritage. He's drawing on Daniel. He draws on Ezekiel. We see particularly those two prophets at play in this scene. And so we see here now, just as Ezekiel was given a scroll and told to eat it, which is a way of saying, I've got a message for you, and it needs to be in you. You need to let it soak into your very cells, into every core and fiber of your being. It's not just going to be a message that you give. You will become the message. So the same too with John here. And so this is, in a sense, John's second calling, second prophetic calling. His first was when he was told to write the messages to the 7 churches, which of course includes the rest of the book. But this is the second one. Now he is told, while Ezekiel was told to prophesy only to Israel, and the irony there is that in being told that, he's told, because if I sent you elsewhere, they'd listen to you, but I'm going to send you to Israel because they won't. So we've got this, and I'm sure that this has been played on quite deliberately, because John, of course, has this message where he's going to prophesy now to the nations, and the intention here is that the nations will actually listen. And that's held in tension with what's already happened in the scriptures in Revelation, where God's wrath has been quite clearly seen as not opening the ears or the eyes of the sinners and the wicked who are being afflicted. They are being more steadfastly stubborn against God. So we're being held into this tension now of, well, if that kind of wrath pouring doesn't work, what will work? well, maybe it'll be something that happens with John taking on this scroll, eating it, becoming the message and part of the message, and the message part of him, and then going to the nations with that and as that message. That maybe this will mean that they will listen. There will be something about the way that John does this in his prophetic calling that will open the ears and the eyes of the nations, and that they will come to be healed. Now, you remember, of course, that already in Revelation, we've been told and teased with the fact that all nations and tribes and tongues and so on will be represented. I'm not saying everyone in every tribe, tongue, and nation will be before the throne room of God, or before the throne of God praising his name, but every nation will be represented there. And so we are already primed to think that there's going to be a time when a message from God will reach all the nations. Now, that was being seen a little bit within the churches that John was communicating with, but they were a small, by far the minority as far as a group was concerned within the Roman Empire. The Church of Jesus Christ was small, and the numbers that were seen before the throne were beyond count. So there was these tensions being held within Revelation. So what have we got? We've been encouraged to be patient, and we've been brought to a point now where perhaps that patience will pay off. We're going to see that see what God's will is for the world, and becoming primed to think that it's a good one, right? Even as we can see that the wrath approach, the anger and the outpouring of rage against sin and against sinners doesn't bring about repentance. Therefore, there might be another way of doing it. And so we're beginning to be primed for this new way of approaching the redemption of the world. Right. I also said, didn't I, that the issue I also want to raise is sometimes you don't get what you hoped for, or at least you do get what you hoped for, it's just not what you hoped it would be. So coming back to my beard, which is not a beard right now, it's just stubble, but I did have a beard, and at the time I grew it, I have to admit, I was amazed that it was a decent beard at all. So I was kind of taken by surprise. I grew it for Decembeard, which is one of those men's cancer causes, and I had never grown anything facially, as far as facial hair is concerned, that I was at all impressed with in the past. So I didn't expect anything out of this, but I was suitably surprised. It was a decent beard and reasonably thick, and other guys that I knew seemed to be quite impressed too. So I kind of determined in my own heart I was going to keep it. So I was meant to grow it for December only, and really went into Christmas saying, no, actually I'm going to, that's it. I'm going to keep this beard. Well, it turns out that my wife does not like beards at all. She in fact hates beards, and I know that there is many women right now crying out in praise and agreeing wholeheartedly with that. And so this caused a bit of tension within the family. Well, not the family, it was really just between Rebecca and I, but I really wanted the beard, and she really didn't want me to have the beard. So we had this conflict, and what I longed for, a decent beard, I had only to find that it wasn't really working out as I hoped. The expectation that this is going to be great, I'm going to grow a decent beard and be able to groom it and pimp it and prime it and whatever, get into that new thing, and yet it was causing this enormous amount of conflict in my marriage. So sometimes what you long for and what you wait for and what you sow and then reap is not all that it cracks up to be. And so it is with this message, the scroll, because John has warned you, this will taste sweet, but it'll be bitter in your stomach. Now that again is a different from Ezekiel, for whom it was just a sweet taste in his mouth. But for John, this will taste sweet, but it's going to be bitter. And that's what this experience of the beard was. I loved the beard, and yet it was bitter to me because I knew I couldn't keep it, not for very long. And we negotiated between us that I would have it for the next calendar year, and then I'd cut it and I would not grow it again. So, like I said, this is not for keeps. This is just for you, just as an illustration to kind of work us into this Revelation story here. So there was the bitter sweetness to the beard. There's a bitter sweetness to what's going on here with the scroll. And we've been longing to read the scroll, and yet it seems that when we do, and when we embody the message and the judgment of God, it might taste sweet initially, but there's going to be a bitterness to that experience. So, I mean, we could kind of get into a little bit of what that means perhaps now, but I'm kind of reluctant, I suppose. I'd like to leave it a little bit there. You could probably reflect perhaps on previous ideas that I've shared around Revelation and what judgment and justice looks like, particularly the tension between judgment, if it's retribution or revenge and getting back, or paying people back for what they've done to you, versus the kind of judgment that we saw in Jesus Christ, who, while we were yet sinners and his enemies, he died for us. And that was his judgment. It was Christ's to judge the world. He was given that role by the Father, and that was the judgment, to die on our behalf. So there's a bit of sweetness in there as well, I think. Perhaps even in the idea that that it would require such a sacrifice for us to be free. Perhaps there's a bit of sweetness as Christians to think, well, I know that I'm free, but really, how free am I really? Or even when I think about freedom, does it not sometimes feel like a greater obligation or responsibility that I now live with? Now that I'm free from sin, why do I keep sinning? Now that I have been forgiven, why am I not very forgiving? There's a bit of sweetness in Christianity, I think, built into it. It's the way it is. And life itself is bittersweet, isn't it? It's an incredible gift. And yet life is hard. Life is suffering. And yet what would we do without the gift? Would we really want to give it up? Well, we don't. We hold on to life as strongly as we can in most cases. So there's a bit of sweetness here, and maybe that's why patience needs to be a virtue in and of itself, because if we have patience only as a means to an end, I'm going to be patient until I get the thing that I want, or the thing I'm longing for, or I will become a patient person. I will let the fiber of my being be redesigned so that I can be patient. And I think that's what is meant actually in Revelation when it's said of those who are able to stand before the throne of God and praise of him. It is that they are there because of their faithful witness, because they remained steadfast, that even under the pressures they were under to give up their faith, they remained steadfast. They were patient, they waited, they trusted God. And I've preached this before, and the fact that patience was in fact the very first virtue, almost one of the highest virtues, ironically considering love, of course, that they believed that God was a patient God, that he allowed things to unfold in certain ways and wasn't swift to intervene, that God was patient with us. We should be patient with others. We should be patient in our trials. We should become patient. And maybe that's another way of saying faith. Anyway, I'll leave that with you. Love to hear your comments and reflections. Hope to see you guys soon. God bless.